Hi guys, and welcome to SureWeb's Azure Insights series. We're here to tackle some of the common questions, concerns, and topics that are really relevant to MSPs who are currently working in the Azure market, infrastructure as a service, and in the Microsoft ecosphere. Our goal is to get these insights, make sure that you're good for positioning, general knowledge, and just having a conversation with your partners, prospects, and everybody you might have to this big ecosphere that we're all a part of. My name is Michael Slater. I'm your host, and I am blessed today to be joined by some fantastic panelists very knowledgeable on the subject. So quickly on the Sherb side, I have Nicholas Bouchard, the most snazzy dressed solution architect I've ever had on my team. Always brings in style, what he brings in intelligence to the conversation in equal parts. I'm also lucky to be joined by Reza. If you have read any of Reza's posts on LinkedIn and you're an MSP, you're missing out. Reza's posts are so prolific. The CTO of Microsoft partner, they actually retweet his posts right now. Is how good they're going. So check out Reza. He's one of the best guys in the space. Rez, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael, Nicholas, and Sherweb for having us.
Excellent. And I also have Oscar from Aegis as well too. Oscar is the resident guru, the smartest man when it comes to Azure in the SoCal area. So we're all blessed to have him as well to give some valuable insights into everything to do with this ecosphere and the use cases for it.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone.
Fantastic. So today, I really want to have a kind of more targeted discussion, if you would, something more along the lines of something that people should be doing, but sometimes don't. Something that everybody wishes they had when they didn't have it, and that would be a backup and DR solution. In context, what we really want to talk about is really the Azure backups. If you go on Twitter and you search it as a topic, you can see it's trending all the time. Usually for affordability, which is something that is a key thing people are looking at, because you find that there's largely two types of people when it comes to backups, right? People that will spend money and people that won't. And the people that won't are people that eventually will. So when we have this conversation, Reza, how do you guys frame that conversation? Because a lot of people again don't want to pay for something until they need it. So how do you have this conversation? How do you position that when you go into a new customer site and you say, hey, look, I'm so glad you picked the solution, but now we have to talk backups. How would you approach that subject?
Yeah, I mean, we always try to lead with a business discussion when we're talking to our clients. We want them to understand that we care about their business first. So we ask them, is there an intellectual property? Depends, of course, again, the type of company. So if they are a software development company and they are developing code and they need to protect it, we ask them those questions. And do you fear somebody getting access to your information? So we have a security and a business continuity discussion with them. So if they are a business that has retail operations and they need to have data in multiple locations and they need to have a central management console to be able to manage the data in all these different locations, and we have that discussion. And so once we understand their vulnerabilities and we understand where their weaknesses are, then we'll get into, well, what happens in this worst case scenario, and we try to walk them through those discussions first, and we try to also calculate and quantify what that cost to the business is. So a really good best practice is a TCO analysis. So whenever we do a proposal and we say, hey, you should really consider a DR and backup solution, we do a TCO analysis and we do it over, if it's a particular, if we're looking at a server, for example, we go through a life cycle of a server, 5, 6, 7 year analysis and say, well, look, you're going to have to, replace a server. So if we're talking about doing an Azure VM, we do a TCO. But the same thing with backups as well. Is what happens if you what are the chances that you're going to lose data? Okay, and we show them statistics that 30% of businesses within the last year have had some kind of data loss. So we quantify what that costs. We quantify what other competitive solutions might be, or and so putting together a full TCO is a good way to frame the discussion.
And on the topic of TCO, that's interesting. So people usually look at total cost of ownership. The usual look is something, if you sit down onto it and people start computing, they usually look at server costs, right? They look at hardware costs. They might even look a little bit at service costs, right? So if I have to go and call somebody per hour, it needs about 4 or 5 hours of maintenance in a month, depending on the server, maybe more, maybe less. That costs. But do people actually look at what it costs to pay for ransom? What it might cost to look to pay for, let's say, anything related to issues with data leakage, liability for that, right? So sorry, that's what I'm looking for. So like, do you guys have a way to factor that in? Do you guys do that in a specific way? Or do you guys just have that under a general TCO? Like, how does it usually look like?
Wow. So there are very, very detailed TCO. It depends on if you're dealing with a mid-sized company to larger, you're going to get very detailed and you're going to factor that in. When you're dealing with the SMBs, you go a little bit more straightforward type of analysis, and
Excellent.
the concerns and the rest. So budget can be an issue there with the smaller companies, and also it just depends on how vulnerable they are as a company. But I think that the more granular you get and you call those out, whether it's ransomware. If you have to have this discussion about ransomware and educating the customer on what ransomware is, you already know you have an issue there. And so what we like to do is actually have workshops. So if you actually put together a security workshop, we focus on the security. Well, we put business continuity DR as part of that discussion. So then we have a TCO calculator that defines everything. So sometimes you have to, I hear this in Microsoft a lot. They say, lead the horse to water. Is you just have to show them all the different steps, all the different vulnerabilities, quantify it, and then it's part of the deliverable you give the customer as part of a workshop is, here is your TCO analysis. And then they see all the different thinking, the thought that goes into it, and the preventative measures.
Yeah, so that's a good idea. So again, these shops are kind of good ways to kind of even tailor it. So hypothetically, even a partner could be like, hey, look, my vertical is, let's say, for example, a small independent software vendors, right? That's kind of what I do. I deal with very small, tiny ISVs that do a niche product. It's like, so maybe I'd throw together something discussing IP loss, right, as a threat, right? How much does IP loss cost you on average? Versus if you're dealing with, let's say, a small chain of clinics, they're probably more concerned about liability for data loss. They're worried about finding, right? Getting approached by a government entity for breaching HIPAA. That's kind of their bigger concerns. So you're right. You do need to kind of tailor these all depending on the business you're talking to, especially in the SMB world. One size necessarily won't fit all. Like you still need to customize, right? And kind of figure out what you're going after and how you need to present it. I think is what I get from that conversation.
100%. Yeah, you have to customize it. You have to understand the business's concerns. And so data leakage and how to quantify that. It's one discussion. It could take an hour just having that discussion within a workshop environment, and having the right stakeholders is key in that, and having the right people in the meeting from the client to gather that information and then put it back into it. So yeah, the more granular you get in that TCO analysis, the better it is.
Excellent. And Oscar, as far as it goes for components that would go into Azure, right, for doing a DR, how do you feel about Azure Files as a solution? What are your thoughts?
Oh, anything to do with Azure. I mean, you're talking about the security that it comes with it. You talk about data leakage, and that data leakage comes into play where you're throwing it all on Azure Files. You're able to control, MFA, conditional access. You're able to say, okay, this file stays only inside of this domain or inside of this geolocation. And if somebody tries to copy it out, that file is no longer valid. It gets shut down. Nobody has access to it. And you can do all kinds of different things with security in Azure using Azure Files as well. So, I mean, you're talking about Azure Files, being able to replicate Azure Files from on-prem to the cloud. That's the same thing. You talk about all this TCO analysis, compliance, data protection, all that different thing comes into play when you throw in Azure Files in there. It's awesome. I mean, to me, that's a good play. You can throw Azure Files on something that's called out there that's called NetApps. NetApps is one of the paths that Azure has. And you're talking about NetApps and performance, the IOPS performance that comes out of NetApps is incredible. I mean, that speed is just unheard of. And you talk, people are amazed that you're like, okay, well, why is it so fast and blah blah, and it's actually faster than anything on-prem. So to me, all that makes total sense in making the companies move forward into the cloud. That's a good solution right there.
Actually, how do you guys feel about the general backups? Like, using Azure as a solution for that. What are your guys' thoughts on that? What's the catch? Is there any downside of shifting that all to Microsoft's infrastructure, or it generally seems to be pretty positive? Like, in your opinion, again, because the pricing point in comparison to other stuff is relatively affordable, and again, as Oscar pointed, the performance is pretty good. Do you guys feel like there's any catch with VM backups, infrastructure backups, anything to do with Microsoft, or is it just actually a good deal?
I think it's a good deal, and the flexibility that it gives you allows you to scale it to exactly what you need it for. So some customers only need it for files and folders, and they don't need 30 recovery points in a single day. They could just do 1 or 2 recovery points, and then the retention, you could retain it up until 99 years, or you could just retain it for 1 week or 2 weeks or a month, depending on what your internal policies are. So that flexibility allows you to price it lower for specific uses. And then the other aspect to me is really about the scalability, the fact that you just scale it as big and as massive as you want. It just gives you a lot more features, functionality, and you have one central place to really go and manage it all, which is another thing that I like for that particular customer.
Excellent. So I got a question for you, Nick. So we talked a lot about these solutions and their practical use cases. Is this something you see a lot when you're building quotes for shareware partners? Like, are people usually taking the DR or the backup option, or do you find people, usually take their chances? Like, what's your general feel on the market right now from what you see from working with partners?
I would say that backups are very common for us. It's something that we add by default. So, and if people don't want them, then we remove them. It's just a no-brainer because they cost little, compared to the rest of the environment. Sometimes it's just a few $1,000s here and per month for a very expensive virtual machine run, hosting some critical data. It's when it comes to the DR portion, there's this misconception that everything in the cloud is automatically redundant, which to a certain extent is true. But then people just assume that if a data center goes down, then automatically their data is replicated somewhere else automatically, and they don't need to pay for that. So there's this maybe there's some education that is needing about the customer, the customers. It's just when you talk to them about their actual needs. Do you need 2 hours? Do you need 24 hours? Do you need any DR? What is your plan? What are your requirements? Then it's usually easy to have them either stick with Azure Backup because you can still recover fairly fast if you use the backup service, or if they have more specific or more demanding needs when it comes to replication, then we can look into, let's say, Azure Side Recovery or something of the sort. So, but if I were to summarize, I would say backups are something they want, while DR is something that they don't think that they need. But like any insurance,
That's a great way to describe it.
You pay for it, hoping that you'll never have to use it. But when you do need to use it, you're obviously very happy that you've been paying that small amount every month.
True. And actually, and another throw-in for that. So, on the topic of site recovery, and again, the importance of that, it's something people don't need to necessarily have, but when they do need it, they're really glad that they had it in the first place. So, Oscar, do you get a lot of people that are approaching you guys to use something like Azure Site Recovery for on-premise solutions? Because you mentioned on-premise is a big part of the business you guys still encounter. Do people want to apply that typically?
Well, it depends on really the size of the company. I mean, when we run into enterprise type level companies, then those companies, it becomes more critical to them because they're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people and hundreds of a lot of data. And so those scenarios, yes, you're going to run into that scenario where they're going to be worried about that scenario, and they actually are proactive. There are those IT guys that are managing that network. They're the ones asking us, going, hey, what am I going to do to protect this data? Well, what if this dies? Well, what if this dies? And they try to predict every level of what might happen, and that's where ASR kicks in. So on the smaller end of the businesses, the 50 users, 150 users, not so much. They don't worry about it as much. They're more on the level of, hey, is my data backed up? And if there's a true disaster where like really something big, then their business isn't going to survive anyways. So they don't really, that really doesn't come into play.
Got it. So that makes 100% sense because people, again, we're in a hybrid world right now, right? That's what makes it interesting because on-prem is the default and cloud's the future. And I always find it so interesting that we're in this weird transitional period that no one knows how long it's going to last for, right? We're not sure exactly how long on-prem infrastructure is going to last because people are still buying it, right? Don't get me wrong, there's all kinds of server reps I know beat the streets looking for deals still, like
Right.
crazy. If you look at traditional distribution, even a big part of their money still comes from the big three server guys, right? That's where they make up the lion's share of the revenue. Not necessarily profit, but revenue comes from there, right? Same with
Yeah.
some MSPs. Like they're all kind of still chasing that bait. So I find that the hybrid opportunity is a really good one because it's a good way to kind of do one of three things. So the first thing you're doing is you're kind of getting a client for the future if you approach a hybrid deal because you're the natural next step when it comes to transitioning away from the hybrid infrastructure. So when that server does fail, there's an eventual issue. They'll come and knock down your doorstep. The second thing that you're kind of doing is you're finding a way to kind of balance out the total cost of ownership with the ongoing moving expense that you're going to have when you move to cloud. So it's a good way to offset, right? So some people are like, I'll pay a little bit right now to keep the TCO that I was promised 5 years ago from another vendor, right? So it gives them like, I almost see it like a scale that they're sliding up and over as like their hardware
Mhm.
on-premise costs go down, their cloud goes up, it equals somewhat the same if you present it properly, which is an interesting way to position it. And the last thing I find that kind of makes hybrid interesting in this case is like you mentioned, is that you can have a complete cloud recovery setup while still maintaining your on-premise equipment. Some people won't do it because of cost. You're right. Some SMBs I find generally will not by any means. They'll just, they'll do basically just backups and that's it. They're not worried about the recovery part necessarily, which may or may not be a mistake. It depends on the situation. It's almost like, do I need to buy insurance? It's the same kind of
Right.
business conversation in your head you're having,
Absolutely.
just on a much larger scale. So I find
Yeah.
that's also an interesting factor as well too, where it's like, if you sell this stuff, you're always going to be around to be able to help with it, right? So kind of also for the MSP ensures continuity because like you're only getting that one project right away, and it might be on-prem, but at least you have that cloud portion that's always going to ensure you have contact with the customer. That's another value of kind of approaching these situations, which I find really really cool. So next question I have, this one's actually kind of more for Nick. So how often would you say people come and they say, hey, why should I use this over Acronis or VM, or should I even at all? People are using it as their backups. What's the main value in using it, Nick? Like, what's the reason why people are looking at that versus other vendors?
Oh, for me, it's definitely the fact that it is perfectly integrated, built into the Microsoft system. So you
Okay.
know that it's designed to work this way. It's within the same portal. It's so you can centralize not only your own data, but data from, let's say, customers. So you have one single kind of glass for for management of that data. As we mentioned before, Microsoft has almost 5,000 security experts. So you know that your data is going to, just for Azure, huh? So you know your data is going to be well kept, it's going to be safe,
Sure.
compliances, so there's a lot of advantages. There's probably different solutions that are equal or maybe a little bit better than Azure backups, but usually you need to go with more specialized vendors, and then you start having different providers, and you're never sure if it's going to be fully compatible. You don't know if they're going to take a completely different direction than Microsoft, because Microsoft knows what they're doing in the sense that they designed Windows Server, they designed SQL Server, and all of that. So when they probably take all of that into consideration for their product lines, while different vendors, they have to wait for Microsoft to make a move, and then they follow up with Microsoft. So for me, it's probably the two biggest advantages. It's built in, and it's part of a greater plan.
Yeah, Oscar, would you agree with that?
I do. I mean, I absolutely. I mean, there's also a big factor in there is cost, right? I mean, the cost of Azure backup, it's pretty inexpensive. I mean, it's when you take a look at other products, and I don't want to start naming other vendors, but you take a look at those other major backup vendors, they're pretty expensive. But they're expensive for a reason, right? Because they have some kind of hardware that's got to get installed on-prem, and that device then brings all the backup to that device, and then that device then replicates out to the cloud. So in the Azure world, you don't have that. You just go straight up
Mhm.
to the cloud, and it's good to go. And so the setup of Azure initially is a little bit more. I mean, because it takes a lot. Let's say you have 5 terabytes or 10 terabytes or whatever it is that you got to bring up to the cloud. Well, that's gonna take a long time, right? To upload all that data up to the cloud. So there's different services that you can do with that, but essentially there's a lot of time spent in that world trying to get that data up to the cloud.
Mhm.
So there's that gap of time. And then with other vendors, you bring a hardware device, you plug it in, and then that backup gets there pretty fast. And then the hardware then replicates up to the cloud slowly, and it does its thing. And over time, but at the time, at the same time, you're still safe and you're still secure with the on-prem hardware device. So that's a benefit in itself there. So there's different, there's different, but I personally prefer Azure Backup.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Yeah, and one other point I'd like to make too
Sure.
is that Microsoft does a really good job with the compression of the data as well. That helps keep it more efficient and to Oscar's point, make the price point a little bit more affordable, even though it's a fully cloud solution with usage. And when you have the usage expense, you have to be worried about the amount of data that you have in the cloud. But I will give Microsoft a lot of credit for that compression technology.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, that is something that Microsoft it really is dedicated for. Is that they're looking to make some very what I consider to be low impact solutions. Right. This thing goes for teams, it goes for every the stack. They're trying to keep things light and kind of save the time, save the space, and make this more equitable for everybody. Right. Because they're designing solutions not just for enterprise. The features are enterprise, but the market is very obviously everywhere. Right. It's for government, it's for SMBs, it's for enterprises. I think that's a great highlight of they could go in and pitch solutions that would be comparable to the vendor that Oscar's pitching, which we all know who it is, but we're not going to say, and which is great, but it can get very expensive. You're right, buying appliances to set up, right, then paying your ongoing fees, like it can be quite an ordeal. From a cheap perspective, that's the reason why I think it trends on Twitter so much, and I read it in all the research we do for these topics, is that it's cheap and it's perfect. Again, on the SMB side, if you're looking strictly for a backup, not so much the DR, backup side, it really does the job. We're big fans of it at SureWeb. So let's say, hypothetically, you guys did get into a complex Azure backup situation, lots of moving pieces. Reza, who would you guys call to get some help?
Well, we would call SureWeb. And and the reasons are obvious. I think Oscar mentioned great in the first series. And I say that with all sincerity. SureWeb is a great partner to work with, and so we have that ability to just call a number and get the support that we need if we can't figure it out. Now we have some other relationships as well that we have. Now Oscar himself, he worked very closely with Microsoft from his days at Disney, so he knows that relationship, and we have other technical resources. I think Luke also mentioned in the last call is there's a lot of in the self-help, self-education opportunities that there are. I know SureWeb does a great job putting on webinars and providing resources to partners to get access to whether it's Microsoft content or SureWeb content. But usually when we need help, our very first call is to SureWeb.
Excellent. Well, I said that's really what you try to do here is you try to simplify a lot of these things, because again, the more technical able partners, the guys like Aegis, you guys, believe it or not, are a rarity, because there's a lot of people that are just still milling about, and infrastructure is kind of like the last frontier of stuff that they're touching. They've been selling telecom for years through an agent model. They've been selling productivity one for another. It could be hosted exchange 5 or 10 years ago, right? But this really is the final, I think, last thing when it comes to cloud maturity for most managed service providers is how do we tackle the infrastructure issue? Because there really isn't much left that's practical. I mean, putting aside things like CRM, which again a lot of MSPs don't do, this is really the last, I think, universal aspect of MSP growth, where it's like now you were truly, I think 100% of cloud-based MSP when you start to tackle this, and you guys are pinnacle examples of what you can achieve when you guys do approach that, right? Everything from your guys' cloud cybersecurity point of view down to cloud collaboration, you guys offer a ton of stuff. And again, if every partner was like you guys, I mean, I would cry from happiness if that's possible. That's how awesome you guys are.
No, we really appreciate it.
Of course.
Well, what we appreciate, Michael, is the very first time I ever heard of SureWeb, it was about the relationship. And the first person I met was SureWeb really believes in the relationship with its customers, and you don't get that with the rest of the disties. And they really target really, really high volume type customers and sometimes enterprise level customers themselves. So for us to have that relationship where we are able to participate even in a webinar like this with thought leadership and share ideas, and we're respected in that regard. It's that mutual respect, and it builds that trust. And we don't hide that secret from our customers, that we say that this relationship, it starts with Microsoft, who develops a lot of the software. Then we take that knowledge and we take it to another level with SureWeb's resources, technical resources, educational resources, and also SureWeb creates other products that Microsoft hasn't thought of, and that we can bring that to the table, like training solutions, like something like Quick Help that allows the customer, then we deliver that to the customer. And so this is a partnership, and it's a relationship that you don't get that often with other distributors. So we really do appreciate what you just said, but we know it's very sincere, but it takes an investment. It takes a time investment from SureWeb, a monetary investment from SureWeb. It takes a time investment from the customers to be willing to participate, to be involved, and to grow that relationship.
Thanks a lot, Reza. And don't worry, I'll transfer you that $1,000 payment out of you for all that the next 24 hours before you formally retract it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So guys, thank you so much for attending. I appreciate everyone's input. Again, the topics today was all around DR, and a big shout out again to Aegis Innovators. You can find them online at Reza.
www.aegisinnovators.com.
Yeah, you can find him on LinkedIn. If you want to get some great MSP content, I suggest you follow Reza. He's produced things that vendors while the streams could have for adoption. So go follow him. You get lots of great vendor announcement content that'll really help you guys get set up. So again, Oscar, Rez, thank you. Nicholas, pleasure as always. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Here, guys.
See you guys.